stop right there. There's Amazon gift cards throughout the entire video. If you guys wanted to redeem them, you have to watch the video and find out. Hope you'll enjoy. What if Deku married Momo Yaoyorozu? Chapter 1. How would this impact the story? How would this make our character stronger, weaker, or would he fight for love? We're all going to figure that out today in the story of, well, Momo Yaoyorozu's heart for love. Hope you'll enjoy. Everything throughout our story would stay the same, all the way until one little instant where everything would change. Instead of Bakugo and Deku fighting with each other, let's just change this around and make it Momo and Deku instead. Let's do some character building here, shall we? And let's try and push this further out to the narrative, where both our characters can get together in some way. As Izuku and Momo were both sat there trying to figure out a plan to get through All Might's defenses, and actually try and figure out a way to defeat him, and not actually cause more damage than what is actually needed to defeat him. Izuku thought of a way to do it, but it causes him to be the distraction, and Momo's gonna have to go on top of a building and fire something. But we're gonna have to figure out how that works. As Izuku and Momo both started as the bell rang throughout the city, as the moment it happened, a giant gust of wind picked up and threw Izuku and Momo back against the wall as they both hit the ground not soon after. As Izuku got up from the top of his feet, not knowing when it was going to happen, so he got Momo inside of an alleyway so they could try their best to stay out of All Might's primal view. As All Might came rushing past them, not knowing where they were at that moment, as Izuku let out a breath of air, as Momo finally came conscious of what was happening around her, as she was about to scream, not knowing that Izuku pushed her to safety, as Izuku covered her mouth, as he told her to shush basically, as their plan was set in motion, as Izuku got out of the alleyway and Momo created the most strongest thing she could at that time, titanium metal alloy, net-wise to try and keep All Might down. As the moment she did so, however, All Might came rushing past them, seeing Izuku coming out of the alleyway. Izuku didn't plan on it, however. He jumped, managing to keep them off of Momo, out of All Might's sight. As the moment All Might managed to actually, well, let's just say catch Izuku by the leg, Momo released her trap a little bit too early, but it still did the job, as All Might was pinned down to the ground, as Izuku told Momo to run at that moment, as he would try his best to keep him at bay until, well, let's just say, until things got a little bit escalated. As Izuku managed to keep All Might stead down until Momo was about to reach the exit, as Izuku was grabbed and thrown halfway to the bus, as like what he did in Canon when he broke All Might's back. Break back in power, go. As Momo eeped by the fact Izuku was thrown to the bus, as a crack was heard, as the only thing Izuku could tell Momo is to run, as Momo was grabbed by her hand and thrown back into the city, as Izuku powered up, not noticing he used to 25% at that moment, and bar rushed to Momo and grabbed her by her hand, flinging her forward to his body so he could cushion the impact that was about to happen, as Izuku and Momo were both thrown for 2 city blocks until they reached the other side. As Izuku was about to get on his hands and feet, realizing the pain would shot through his back, realizing he couldn't move, his body was too broken at that moment. As Izuku couldn't move, Momo ran over to Izuku and see if it was alright or not. As Momo would grab Izuku's hand, realizing it was slightly broken, she would be worrying for her partner, realizing they won't be passing it. She was useless herself. She couldn't do anything, as she was about to have a panic attack. Izuku grabbed her by her hand, telling her everything will be alright. You can do it, Momo, Izuku said, as he left his consciousness almost out before his last words came out. You can be a hero, Momo. You can do it, Izuku said, as Momo, last bit of confidence she had, She created one of the biggest things she possibly could at that moment. Well, what is the biggest thing you can think about? The biggest thing I could think about is a rocket. As Momo tried to grab Izuku to try and, well, bring him with her, as Izuku told him, or her, he'll weigh her down too much. Go, Momo, go, Izuku said, sacrificing himself, as Momo went on the rocket and went through to the exit, passing Izuku and Momo in the exam. And the recovery girl is currently beating All Might over the head with a stick. Being honest, I don't know why she's able to lift it. I'm guessing she's also superhuman. As Izuku was laying in his bed as Momo came into the room, asking if he was okay, as Recovery Girl would left the room after, well, beating the shit out of Toshinori. As Recovery Girl would leave. As Izuku would sit up in his bed, straightening his back slightly after it being broken. Do not make any backshot quotes or I swear to God your comments getting blocked. As Izuku and Momo sat there in peaceful silence, as the only thing that could be broken there was the defiance of All Might saying, I'll leave you two kids alone, I'm just gonna go step out with Recovery Girl, All Might said as he stepped out of the ward. As Momo would sit closer to Izuku, not knowing what was gonna intern in this conversation. As Izuku would start the conversation off with, So, how are you, Momo? Izuku said. I'm doing okay. What about you? You took All Might's full force to the back. And I feel like one of you were gonna send a fucking quote like that. As Izuku would raise his hand, saying he was perfectly fine, and he didn't really need much healing, but he was okay. Mainly. It wasn't as bad as what his hands were in a sports vessel, but he would do. As Izuku and Momo's conversation would go on for an hour, until All Might arrived back with Recovery Girl dragging him by the ear, shouting at him, You should not be out of bed, get back in bed now, Recovery Girl said, pulling him further and further in, creating more and more injuries to Toshinori's already existing broken ribs. Recovery Girl, who's that? Momo said, questioning the reality of the situation. This is Toshinori Yagi. I'm a standing teacher just in case All Might's not available. I worked with his agency, he said. Oh, okay, Momo said, not questioning any further. From the heightened adrenaline, from experiencing, All Might's blast firsthand. As Momo would leave the room, as Izuku would think on it. For the next couple of days, Izuku and Momo would talk often and more often as what you would think they would do. So, what would you think that would happen next? Well, my thought exactly they would meet up in like a sit-in, but we're going to think about that a little bit more. As Izuku and Momo started sitting with each other in the cafeteria, instead of her sitting with her friends, Mina, Ashido, and so on and so forth. They would get confused, the girls, wondering why the two would be sitting near each other, until Mina started to think a little bit more into it. A bit too more into it, as you catch my drift. As Mina Ashido would try her best to figure out what was happening, if it was love at first sight, or would it be by the fact Izuku saved her, she will find out for herself. As the days goes by, Izuku and Momo got closer, and closer, and closer. To the point Momo thought they would have a study session together at her house. She invited him over as Izuku would enter the house, not knowing anything was wrong with it. Until he arrived there, he was shocked beyond repair how big the house was. But he had to stay cool. He didn't want to look like a fool in front of his friend. As Izuku rung the bell to the gate, as Momo entered the gate, stating to let him in, the gates opened naturally. Izuku walked straight through, only to realize was that, the gates weren't the only thing. Make the house look special, the flowers, red roses, of course, tulips, and a bunch of others to blend it in a lot better than what it was seeming to be. As Izuku would walk through the cobblestone, flooring, He would reach the door, open it to see a well-dressed maid, beautiful as always. As Izuku would bow down and asking her, "Oh, you must be Momo's friend. Please, come in," she said, as Izuku went to go sit down at the dining room table where Momo was with her notes and everything, with a red blush slightly on her face, knowing that she's never had another friend before at her house. Well, she's had other rich people at her house, but they were never friends. They were just people that Momo knew that were also rich. Izuku, on the other hand, people that, well, she didn't know, and she was on a social standing to get an understanding of him. She, well, loved that. Knowing that she wasn't going to be used by other males in her population for just her wealth and money and power and, well, her status in tow. She saw Izuku as a friend. She never saw him as a thing to use against other people. She saw him as a deep friend, the person who she could rely on at any given moment. And that's what made it great. As Momo and Izuku both stayed with each other for the next coming hours until Izuku had to go home. Around that time, Momo finally get up and get all the courage that she could at that moment and ask the question if she could, well, go on a Can I go on a date with you, Izuku? She said, using the last of her remaining energy, as she, well, fainted as Izuku tried to catch her the best he could, but the butler catched her at that moment, helping, well, Izuku being the helpy bunch, helped and carried her to her bed, where she laid peacefully like a sleeping princess. Thank you all for watching part 2. If you guys want it, it'll be there sooner or later. 100 likes for part 2, and I promise that one too. In a bit, boys. Have a good day.